Every WWE comeback is supposed to hit. Sadly though, sometimes it's only a matter of weeks, days, hours, or even minutes before the company realizes they've made a terrible, terrible mistake. So I'm Gareth, you're watching What Culture Wrestling, and here are 15 WWE returns that immediately backfired. Number 15, Bob Backlund 2000. Would-be President of the United States, Bob Backlund, remember that, became a perennial Royal Rumble surprise throughout the 1990s. He showed up in the match between 1993 and 1996, then returned at the start of the new millennium in 2000. That one-off wasn't what it seemed. The WWF planned to bring Bobby back as a manager for Kurt Angle, which actually didn't seem like a bad idea. But it flopped hard. It's true. Kurt has told a story via his podcast about Backlund forgetting they were live on Raw when shooting a backstage skit. This happened shortly after they'd been shunted together as a mentor and protege double act. According to Angle, Bob was a little too over the top and erratic during skits, but it was his character-breaking moment on the flagship that tipped producers over the edge. Bob was supposed to put somebody in a submission, but they were sitting down. So he turned to Kurt and asked if the dude was supposed to be standing or not. This real-life bewilderment caused Angle to turn and stare at a WWF writer who was standing off-screen. He was a rookie, so he didn't know what to do, and he couldn't believe that a true veteran like Backlund could be so clumsy. Look, it was a mistake, they happen, but it was a costly one. The promotion decided to go in a different direction with Kurt and take Bob off television. So much for high hopes that the celebrated former world champion would help take Angle to the next level. He got there himself anyway, so it didn't really matter. Number 14, Sunny 2009. Time to play a game of Spot the Sunny. Her life has taken several miserable turns over the years, but Sunny did seem to be getting things back on track when WWE brought her back for Raw's 15th anniversary celebrations in 2007. Eventually, the company inducted her into the Hall of Fame in 2011. Sandwiched in between was a WrestleMania appearance most simply won't remember, and you've got a good excuse for that. WWE barely promoted that Sunny was part of the Miss WrestleMania Battle Royale at WrestleMania 25. In fact, she was hardly on camera at all before being dumped out of the match by Beth Phoenix. The women involved didn't get individual entrances. They were played down to the ring by Kid Rock instead. Then Santino Marella won the bout dressed as his twin sister Santina. Yep, Mania memories. At one point, mid-match, it became obvious that even announcers Michael Cole and Jerry Lawler had forgotten all about Sunny's only official WWE match. So the backfire here was on WWE itself. Why bother bringing the original diva in at all if you weren't gonna shout about it and make some noise about her sole in-ring appearance as an active talent? It didn't make a lick of sense. Some fans in attendance for Mania might not have even known that they were watching someone from yesteryear battle it out with the current crop of divas. I mean, even finding a workable screenshot of Sunny in the match is quite tough, but we just about got one. Her comeback really was that low-key. Number 13, Eva Marie 2021. Not many shed a tear when WWE cut ties with Eva Marie and gave up on their all-red everything experiment in 2017 after years of bashing heads against brick walls. It was clear to anybody with two working eyes that she did not have an aptitude for the industry and was never going to become an accepted member of the women's division. I mean, it sounds cruel, but it's just true. And that was especially true once Divas gave way to Revolution in 2015. But then they tried again. Following several weeks of hype vignettes, Eva appeared on the 14th of June 2021 Raw and had Doudrop wrestle on her behalf. Yeah, that was Piper Niven's crappy original name on the main roster. Fun times. This was more of the same stuff fans had seen from Marie during an unsatisfying first run in the company, and there was absolutely zero demand for it. No one was fooled. It became clear instantly that she wasn't gonna work second time around either. Like it was obvious literally seconds after she strutted on screen with Doudrop behind her. Now, credit to Piper for doing everything she could to facially sell how awful Eva was being, but therein lies the problem. Marie was playing a one-note, dated caricature during an era where the likes of Becky Lynch, Charlotte Flair, Bianca Belair, and Bayley were working bangers between the ropes. She felt seriously out of place. Again. WWE WWE gave up later the same year after a roundly unwanted SummerSlam clash with Alexa Bliss that included way too much Lily the Doll nonsense. Hey, some people like it, but I'm just not one of those people. This evolution was a throwback to the pre-Revolution days, and not a good one. And that is probably that for her links to pro wrestling. Now we're talking about all these returns and comebacks that were a little bit disappointing or just backfired altogether. So I want to know right now in the comments section right down below, what do you think is the most disappointing comeback in WWE history? We might cover it in this list, but if we don't, let me know. Number 12, the British Bulldog 1999. Keep in mind before watching this entry right here that the WWF wanted Davey Boy Smith to be a key part of world title storylines heading into 2000. He feuded with The Rock and was part of a six-pack challenge for the vacant WWF title at Unforgiven 1999, and that took place on the 26th of September. Earlier in the month, on the 9th of September, SmackDown, Smith returned to action and beat Big Boss Man in 90 seconds for the Hardcore title, then handed the belt off to Al Snow. Right, the British Bulldog did all this wearing jeans and a hoodie, so he barely even looked like the chiseled Man Mountain Federation fans had last seen back in 1997. Truthfully, Davey's comeback was snake bit from the off. He was having personal issues and had various addiction woes away from the ring. Regardless, this was a less than stellar piece of booking for such a major comeback. The company even changed Bulldog's music up, which meant that fans in attendance initially had no clue who was answering Bossman's open challenge, Def Rebel style. Worse was to come the longer Smith wrestled. It was painfully obvious that he was a shadow of his former self as a worker. The whole thing was pretty sad to see, actually. Bulldog had been such a well-received star in his prime, and now here he was looking like someone's dad decided to win the Hardcore title before picking the kids up from school. When it makes someone big time look less than, guys, this was just a poor decision. If anything, Bulldog should have been kept back for Unforgiven and eased back in rather than poking his nose into the Bossman versus Snow stuff, just because that story had dogs in it and he had dog in his name. Yep, very WWE. Number 11, Road Warrior Animal 2005. What comes to mind when you hear the name Legion of Doom? Big spiked shoulder pads, NWA/WCW squash matches, and Hawk yelling, "What a rush," right? One name that doesn't, or shouldn't, leap to the forefront of brains is John Heidenreich. Unfortunately, someone in WWE Creative thought he'd be the ideal replacement for the sadly deceased Hawk in 2005, and that ruined Animal's comeback immediately. On the 14th of July, 05 SmackDown, then champs MNM challenged the famous Road Warrior to find a tag team partner and face them for the belts at the upcoming Great American Bash pay-per-view. Somebody must have cracked Animal on the bonce with a steel chair backstage, because he stumbled around before settling on Heidenreich as the right man for the job. And the worst era of LOD commenced. Yay. Literally nobody asked for this. Had WWE fans been polled, they probably would have plumped for Animal riding solo against Joey Mercury and Johnny Nitro rather than teaming with Heidenreich. Worse, Heidenreich then became an official member of the Road Warriors when he added his own face paints and spiky shoulder pads to the equation. This was even worse than the Droz offshoot had been years earlier in 1998 and 1999. Bringing Animal back could have worked out had he not harpooned his own credibility within minutes by recruiting Heidenreich. Oh, that name. Fans didn't want to see anybody replace Hawk. They really didn't. Look, Animal and John might have been palatable without the forced LOD 2K5 stuff, but this was just never gonna get over. Number 10, Scott Hall 2002. Okay, so some viewers might consider this slightly unfair, because there was a bit of excitement for the NWO's arrival on WWF screens in February 2002. In storyline, Vince McMahon decided to inject his creation with a lethal dose of poison, is how he put it. Little did the then boss know that he was inflicting a poisonous atmosphere on his otherwise harmonious locker room by bringing in Scott Hall. Hall returned at No Way Out alongside Order buddies Hulk Hogan and Kevin Nash. Fans popped, of course, but Scott became a backstage nuisance almost overnight. The man was battling a lot of demons at the time, so it's safe to say he probably shouldn't have been out on the road at all. WWF fans also wanted to see his old Razor Ramon character more than his NWO one, but that wasn't the pitch. The bad guy offered next to nothing before getting released in May after the infamous plane ride from hell back from Europe. On top of all that, Hall's hiring and and behavior had a negative knock-on effect for top acts like Steve Austin. Working with Scott was a rotten experience for Stone Cold. He was not happy about being mired in the mid-card for WrestleMania 18, and he found that Hall wasn't too interested in putting on a show anyway. The single positive to come out of Hall's WWF reprise was his quick "Hey yo" and "No Way Out." That earned a sizable pop, and Scott flashed a genuine smile. Everything after that exposed the fragility of his personal life at the time, though. The late legend contributed little beyond annoying people behind the curtain or civilians on the aforementioned journey back from a European tour. And speaking of the NWO, number 9, Kevin Nash 2011. In the immediate aftermath of CM Punk's iconic pipe bomb promo in June 2011, nobody sat down and said, you know what would really kick this into high gear? A confusing sub-story starring Kevin Nash. Okay, maybe Michael Hamflett did. WWE thought that was a fab idea though. So they brought Big Sexy back at SummerSlam to attack Punk and open the door for Alberto Del Rio to cash in his Money in the Bank briefcase. This cut the summer of Punk off at the knees, and wasn't a surface-level dumb return that actually turned out to be genius. If only somebody could do a video on that kind of thing. I mean, that was true at SummerSlam, even before Nash got to his weird claims about receiving a text from Triple H, even though it turned out it wasn't actually Triple H texting from Triple H's phone. Yeah, that explanation sucked bad. This was the age of scripted promos, and it seemed even Kev was mystified by the plots he was asked to spew here. Punk's pipe bomb on John Cena, Vince McMahon, and WWE in general broke the fourth wall, referenced New Japan, mentioned Ring of Honor, and came across as something completely refreshing in an otherwise sanitized corporate world. It was huge. Rather than capitalizing on that and Punk's disappearance with the WWE title post Money in the Bank though, the promotion crowned an interim champion, then had Diesel launch into a mini feud with CM after that. Yes, fans there live were always gonna react to Big Nash, but his comeback didn't make sense unless he literally was there to help out Hunter. Apparently that was far too simple a concept for the weary creative team to fathom, so they went with Kevin and Trips at loggerheads. As Punk's hot summertime shoot became less and less of a concern, Backfired is putting it mildly. This stunk. Number 8, Scott Steiner, 2002. The Steiner brothers hated WWF life so much between 1992 and 1994 that they couldn't wait to leave, lay over in ECW as a quick excursion, then return home to WCW. Between then and 2002, Scott Steiner had blossomed into a main event level talent who looked drastically different to the mullet-rocking tag team wrestler he'd been during the new generation. Big Papa Pump was walking muscle and had one of the most ridiculously pumped up physiques ever. The man looked like a superhero. It'd also been a highlight of latter-day WCW before the wheels fell off, and Vince McMahon bought the group's skeleton for a paltry sum. Once his AOL Time Warner contract expired, Scotty was ready to land in WWE and continue his good work. At Survivor Series 02, he interrupted a going nowhere Matt Hardy and Christopher Nowinski segment, and the live crowd in Madison Square Garden for the pay-per-view went nuts. Full cashew. WWE would have been all smiles upon hearing that response, but then Steiner opened his mouth. Oh boy. High fives would have turned to sighs when Scott loudly shouted, "Gimme a effing mic on air!" Oops. His debut was definitely eye-catching all around, but that little line was a sneak peek into the unruly mind of the genetic freak. He was so used to throwing his weight around that he didn't know how to do anything else. The returning star's resultant series of matches versus Triple H also floundered. Somehow, despite stinking up the joint at the 2003 Royal Rumble, Scott and Hunter arguably went on to work an even worse match at No Way Out. WWE didn't exactly get the best of Steiner from day one. In fact, they got the worst. If you're having fun hearing about these WWE returns that backfired right away, then hit that subscribe button right down below and you'll get even more wonderful What Culture Wrestling videos absolutely every single day. Number 7, Shawn Michaels 2018. Plot twist, sort of. Shawn's 2002 return was everything a blistering comeback should be. That immediately paid dividends at SummerSlam. I mean, it looked like Michaels had not lost a damn step. He'd then go on to enjoy approximately 8 years of stunning work that maybe even topped what he'd achieved pre-back injury in the 1990s. Lightning didn't strike twice for HBK though. He signed on for a marquee tag bout with Triple H versus Kane and The Undertaker at Crown Jewel 2018, and fans were hyped by the thought of seeing Shawn wrestle for the first time since his 2010 retirement. He'd always been steadfast about never returning, so this felt like a huge, gigantic deal. Surely such a legend wouldn't agree to work again unless he was about to blow everyone's minds, right? Right? Sadly, it was obvious within minutes that Shawn was not the HBK of old. Fans knew he'd be slower and have some ring rust, but they also had every right to expect a better match than what they actually got. The Crown Jewel tag was embarrassing from start to finish. Trips tore a pec, Kane's wig fell off, all four botched multiple spots. It was just terrible. It was all terrible. Michaels and Taker later admitted their regret over this whole sorry affair. They were mortified, and rightly so. Even the biggest Shawn Michaels fan could have done without this sorry excuse for a send-off. DX versus the Brothers of Destruction unpicked some of the exhilarating work that HBK had done before retiring the first time. It was all just a blatant cash grab that left a really bad taste in your mouth. And hey, nobody's throwing stones at wrestlers for getting paid, but the match was atrocious. It began poorly, then got even worse. What a nightmare. Number 6, Goldberg 2019. Right, I remember watching WrestleMania 33 live in my bedroom, and I will never forget just how electrifying Brock Lesnar versus Goldberg was on that show. It was awesome. They only worked for a few minutes, but both hurled one another around the ring with devastating power moves before getting to the finish. It was one of the better matches on the whole card, so WWE cannot be blamed for wanting a little more when Bill was ready. Almost 2 years later, Goldberg was back for a fantasy clash with The Undertaker at Super Showdown 2019. WWE hyped all this like Taker's gong had hit on Nitro or Bill had speared him on Raw is War in the 90s. It felt massive. The first 2 minutes, or thereabouts, were actually pretty fun. Until Goldberg suffered a concussion, and the bout turned into a train wreck that could have realistically resulted in further serious injury or worse. Both Goldberg and Undertaker were visibly humiliated afterwards, especially the latter. He ironically started to question his own mortality, because some of his recent matches had been pretty darn crap. This, along with the aforementioned Crown Jewel 2018 disaster, was the nadir of dream matches on Saudi Arabian supercards. WWE had to face it, some legends just couldn't go anymore. The bell had to ring and they had to deliver, but they couldn't. Goldberg going after Taker was one match too many for the ex-WCW squash match machine, and you probably know what happened next. Big Bill's next foray was even less enticing, and it blew up in WWE's faces instantly. Sorry in advance, my friend, but it's time to take a good long look at the misery of Super Showdown 2020. Number 5, Goldberg 2020. Yep, it's Goldberg again, and it hurts bad for a guy who loved a man and even met him once to slap Bill twice. Facts are facts though. Anybody who remembered the Nightmare Taker botch fest that nearly brained both legends could have told you that Goldberg returning on the 7th of February 2020 SmackDown and challenging Bray Wyatt's Fiend gimmick to a Universal title match in Saudi Arabia was a terrible idea. But WWE plowed ahead with it anyway, because of course they did. They failed to learn any lessons from the prior year's card, and they wanted Goldberg to beat Wyatt for the belt like he was in there with James Ellsworth. As soon as the bell sounded and Bill raised that belt above his head, the match became known for being one of the least wanted title changes in history. All in a night's work, eh? In truth, the backfiring started on TV earlier in the month. Fans could smell a horror show a-coming as soon as Goldberg told The Fiend he was next on SmackDown. Bray's wacky Undertaker meets Mankind character had been one of wrestling's most intoxicating guises since 2019. But everything was about to fall apart thanks to WWE's weird obsession with giving Saudi Arabia more lame Goldberg matches. COVID ensured they didn't even get to to the payoff of Goldberg versus Roman Reigns at WrestleMania 36 either. Nope, instead of that, WWE was forced to cram Braun Strowman in as a last-minute challenger. Feels like all that went down in a dream, and his Universal title reign was barely better than Bill's. This was an awful time for the old Universal strap, but it all started with sacrificing Wyatt's Fiend at the feet of the Man. Number 4, Brian Christopher, 2011. Revisit the 14th of March 2011 Raw today, and you will cringe the night away. On paper, a heel Michael Cole bringing back Jerry Lawler's son to browbeat him for being a rotten father worked. In execution, though, it was one of the most awkward segments in WWE history. It's also distressing for those who love them some Grandmaster Sexy. The former Too Cool favorite showed up on the flagship at the behest of Cole, but nobody in attendance seemed to have a clue who he was. Yep, it was just dancing to nothing. Brian Christopher's entrance played before deathly silence, and the crowd just sat on their hands during tense dialogue between Bry and Jerry. Honestly, the silence was deafening. You could almost hear vendors selling popcorn in the foyer. It became clear all too quickly that WWE's audience had changed quite a bit since Christopher was last tearing it up as Sexy. Without the Grandmaster getup or Rikishi and Scotty 2 Hotty by his side, Brian meant, well, nothing to the modern fanbase. Crickets, people. Crickets. It was downright painful to watch somebody who had once been a part of a seriously hot tag title change on Raw in 2000 suffer this undignified humiliation. Back then, Christopher was one of the hottest acts in the entire company. By 2011, his star had faded to the point he might as well have been a fast food worker Lawler was rude to in the 1970s. That's the kind of gusto he was welcomed back with by fans. Poor guy. Number 3, Lord Tensai, 2012. Matt Bloom was known amongst wrestling fans for 3 things by 2012. 1, playing walking penis gimmick Prince Albert during the Attitude Era. Yep, there's a sentence. 2, having a hairy body. And 3, going off to Japan after leaving WWE in 2004 and becoming a much better worker. He deserves credit for that last one, so it's no wonder the promotion wanted to bring him back years later for another whirl. Could they have picked a worse time to debut his new Lord Tensai gimmick than the night after WrestleMania, though? Tensai re-debuted in the E under his new name on the 2nd of April 2012 Raw. He beat Alex Riley in a quick squash that was designed to ready him for top star John Cena. But the rowdy post-Mania crowd were not interested in any of that. No, they were far too busy living it large and trolling Bloom with chants of Albert, Albert, Albert. Wacky roar after Mania crowd. The new character was doomed to fail after that. Things might not have been so bad had the guy been returning as his old A-Train persona, or even under the Giant Bernard name he'd used out in New Japan. Hell, calling him Albert and cutting their losses would have been smarter than introducing an elaborate gimmick that was too over the top to be taken seriously by revelers in Florida for Mania 28. What were they thinking? Number 2, Hulk Hogan 2025. Read the room. WWE failed to do that during Raw's debut episode on Netflix. Hulk Hogan came out with Jimmy Hart to prattle on about his new beer, run through some catchphrases, and soak up acclaim from the audience. Apparently, some backstage thought that last one was a real possibility in 2025. Those people haven't been paying attention to anything surrounding Hulk for a long time, it seems. The live crowd booed Hogan out of the building, which is something WWE should have seen coming a mile off. Poor Jimmy Hart stood behind Hulk waving his flag and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. This was worse than wrestling Mancow on pay-per-view multiple times for WCW. Way worse. It even tops having his precious hair snipped by Brutus the Barber Beefcake, for crying out loud. Brutus cost me my hair too. Okay, enough terrible jokes. The real joke was on WWE for thinking Hulkamania would be embraced here. This segment reeked of latter-day Vince McMahon delusion, but Vince was long gone. This happened under Triple H and TKO's watch. Let's assume they won't be doing anything of the sort again anytime soon. Reportedly, Hulk's planned appearance on the next Saturday night's main event was scrapped because of this calamity of a promo. Yep, good call. Hogan was a game changer for the WWF in the 1980s, and even revived his fortunes for further runs in the early 2000s. But times have changed and the people have spoken. They don't want to see Hulk on WWE TV anymore for various reasons. Let it go, WWE. Number 1, Shane McMahon, 2023. What is it with the McMahons and torn quads on pay-per-views they're not even advertised for? Vince shredded his legs when trying to sort out the messy finish between John Cena and Batista at Royal Rumble 2005. Years later, his son Shane Shane collapsed to the mat in agony after shockingly returning for an impromptu match versus The Miz at WrestleMania 39 in 2023. Like his dad, Shane-O had suffered an embarrassing injury. He ripped his quad during the very first leapfrog spot and had to be replaced by Snoop Dogg. This is the kind of story an older lapsed fan who hasn't watched in years probably wouldn't believe. Let me get this straight. Shane McMahon returned for a match in 2023, got injured, and Snoop Dogg just happened to be on hand as a substitute versus The Miz? You're telling me The Miz is still around? That's the most shocking part. But yep, this happened in real life. It wasn't a fever dream, I swear. Shane's familiar "Here Comes the Money" entrance music refrain will always get a pop. It's so memorable and catchy. But the pop fizzled by the time he was jousting with Miz and fans settled back into their seats. Those punters then watched as McMahon went for a leapfrog, his body gave out on him, and everyone had to call something else on the fly as Shane was helped to the back by medics. It was chaos. Entertaining chaos, but chaos. This was undoubtedly one of the most bizarre segments in Mania history, and that is saying something. Returning to action also backfired spectacularly on Shane. He went from feeling on top of the world to spending the night in hospital. Sorry, a local medical facility. There goes the money. If you had fun looking back at these WWE returns that backfired, then have a click on this 25 failed experiments from WWE developmental list too. You're gonna have a great time.